Hi, I'm Dave Lamb, and I teach Old Testament at Biblical Seminary. I'm looking forward to coming to speak to you all at Bucknell in a couple weeks. First, I need to say two things up front. This is my first video, so if it's lousy, don't blame me. Second, this is not my idea. This is Jesse North's idea. So if it's lousy, blame Jesse. I was on a date recently with my wife Shannon. We ended up chatting with the server for a little while. He turns and says to me, "So what do you do?" I say, "I teach the Bible, mainly the Old Testament." "The Old Testament," he says. "Isn't that where God is always getting angry, smiting people and destroying cities all the time?" I said, "Well, not exactly. But the God of the Old Testament has a bad reputation. The bad reputation of the Old Testament God even shows up in the comics. In perhaps the most famous Far Side cartoon of all time, God is at his computer. On the display is an innocent-looking young guy walking under an enormous grand piano, supported by just a few thin ropes. God has his finger over his keyboard, hovering over one key in particular, the smite key. Don't you wish you had a smite key sometimes? The Old Testament God has a bad reputation in the comics and elsewhere, in films even. And that's why I wrote this book. God Behaving Badly. Is the God of the Old Testament angry, sexist, and racist? I'm going to talk about chapter 2 when I come up to Bucknell. I'm going to look at the story of Uzzah. Poor Uzzah was the guy that, as the ark was coming into Jerusalem and it started to wobble, he reached out his hand and was struck down, killed by God. What's up with that? Is the God of the Old Testament angry? Well, as we look at the story of Uzzah, and we look at what motivates God's anger throughout the Old Testament, particularly in the book of Exodus, though, I think we may be surprised to see that ultimately what is motivating God's anger is love. Looking forward to seeing you. Bye.